One of the places that the Rainforest Information Centre has been working is in the south of India, a mountain called Arunachala in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. And this is one of the most sacred places in India because in Hindu mythology, in the far distant past, the trinity of gods were meeting, and two of the gods, Vishnu and Brahma, remonstrated with the third god, the supreme god, Shiva, that his appearance as a column of light that stretched from infinity to infinity was dazzling them beyond endurance. And so they pleaded with him to please could he tone it down a bit. And Shiva, in his compassion, agreed to do so, and henceforth appeared as this mountain Arunachala, and that's been his only physical form ever since. As a result of this, a vast temple was built there covering more than 23 acres, and pilgrims by the millions have thronged there from all over India and all over the world for century after century. In the early years of this century, one of the pilgrims that came to Arunachala was a god-intoxicated teenager named Ramana, who went on to become one of the greatest sages of the century and was famous throughout India and throughout the world. And it was always his claim that it was the mountain that was enlightened and not he. So in 1988, we received a letter at the Rainforest Information Centre from one of the nuns at Ramana's ashram. She wrote saying that in great despair, that whereas when Ramana had first arrived at the mountain, it was clothed in a mighty jungle and even tigers could be met walking along the flanks, now nothing remained but thorns and goats, and couldn't we please do something? So I composed a reply at first saying, well, look, I'm terribly sorry, we're just into saving intact rainforests and we don't really know anything about rehabilitating sacred mountains, but somehow I couldn't send that letter. And in the end, we raised some money, we did a benefit, and we sent her some money and sent her instructions about how to set up a non-government organisation capable of looking for funding, and indeed we were able to get significant funding, including 2 grants from the Australian Government Aid Agency for this project.
It was her dream, and so it became our dream, just 2 or 3 of us, that we should have a hill again forested as it was before. We formed a small group called it Annamalai Reforestation Society.
A couple of years later, my friend John Button and his partner Heather Batch went over there, and they spent most of the next 7 or 8 years working with the local people and reweaving Shiva's robes.
The actual starting point was a deep ecology workshop, a Council of All Beings with John Seed, that was held on my land back in Australia. It was one of those absolute deluges of Decembers, I think we had 20 inches or something like that in the night. And between the downpours, John could see heaps of what we'd been planting, and that had been the regeneration of classical North Coast degraded pasture and banana land. And he said, well, have you heard of a mountain called Arunachala?
For the next 7 years, John Button worked with the Annamalai Reforestation Society to reclothe the sacred mountain.
The Rainforest Information Centre became involved, and I became involved by the need for there to be someone who had a passion for planting trees and some kind of dirty hands experience for getting the work done, because the people who were also really interested in re-greening Arunachala were people here on more of a spiritual quest.
Planting trees under these conditions proved incredibly difficult and labour intensive, that at one time there was over 500 men and women working in the period following the monsoon, which is the only time that trees can be planted on the mountain, and so it was a bit like building the pyramids or something like that. It was quite incredible. Because of the extreme harsh climatic conditions, rivers of mud come pouring down the mountain after the rains because there's no trees further up to stop them, and these blistering hot winds from the desert plains come scorching up the side of the mountain in the summer. And so we found it necessary to build these individual rock walls surrounding each seedling in order to protect it and in order to create a microclimate that would allow it to grow until it was able to fend for itself.
As well as the ongoing tree planting project, a model permaculture farm has been established. Regular educational courses conducted, and a huge nursery operates from within the temple.
You know, one of the local people suggested that it might be a good idea to approach the temple authorities to see if we could actually raise our nursery in the main temple itself. Now, it just hadn't clicked. I mean, the temple here is the heart of this community. In every South Indian town, the main temple is physically as well as spiritually, it's the centre of the town, and everybody comes through it not only for their religious rituals but as a part of their daily, just the daily flow of their lives. And so what happened was some of the project people approached the temple authorities asking if we could use some of the temple grounds and their waters to grow a nursery, and in the process we would regenerate the gardens of the temple. And now that nursery, which grows sometimes 200,000 or 300,000 seedlings a year, it provides both for our plantings way beyond the temple, on the mountain, at these various sites around the mountain, but also they get distributed right throughout the community. Even the forestry department comes along and takes away our seedlings because they don't grow them as well themselves. The chief administrator, for example, recently came forward and asked for several thousand seedlings for regenerating gardens in other temples around the district. Now, I don't know what that all means in the long term, but there's something really significant as far as I'm concerned if this project can actually regenerate a part of that old cultural tradition, which is the association of trees and temples, plants and temples. And that maybe is one of the most significant things that happens, because ecological awareness is increasing everywhere around the world, including in these local communities. But actually associating that environmental awareness with spiritual awareness and with regenerating the old relationship with the divine, that is equally important as any physical role we might play, I think.
According to the tradition, people believed that the fastest way to get enlightened was to walk clockwise around the mountain. And so hundreds of thousands of people would be walking around the mountain, especially under the full moon. But not many people were caring for the trees. And so I felt that this was such a spiritual task to be reweaving Shiva's robes, that I started to say to people that actually nowadays a faster way to get enlightened was to look after these trees, to water them, to protect the trees, that if Shiva had wanted to appear in the form of an eroding, muddy, barren piece of rock, he could easily have done so, but he chose to appear as a mighty jungle, and that it was a sacred task to allow his costume to return. And I went around, like many of the pundits in that part of the world, preaching this gospel. But one day I woke up early in the morning, beset with doubts and trepidation, because I realised that I hadn't really checked this with Shiva. That how arrogant of me to just assume that I could speak in this way. And so, in considerable turmoil, I made my way to the mountain and climbed up some way up the mountain and sat. To ask forgiveness really from the spiritual energies of that place, and to also find out if I might be permitted to say this kind of a thing. So I was sitting there with my eyes closed and rather sad kind of frame of mind when I heard a noise, and I looked up, and these 3 monkeys had appeared in the glade. I was in a glade that was surrounded by the seedlings that our project had planted, and 3 monkeys appeared on the edge of the glade, and they looked around cautiously, and they noticed me, but they paid no attention, and then they walked to the other side of the glade and looked around, and then they barked, and that was the sign, and a whole community of monkeys, perhaps 60 or 70 monkeys, came into the glade and just began to set up their life there in front of me. And mothers were feeding babies, and couples were making love, and young monkeys were playing with each other and rolling about. And I saw one baby monkey, what looked like leaving its mother for the first time, that it would just move a few inches away and then run back and then move a little further. And all the time these 3 guards were keeping an eye out, and on the other side another 3 guards were watching. And it must have been for half an hour that I was privileged to see their whole life presented and before me in a way that I've never really seen since. It's one of the great experiences of my life with wild animals, and I felt this great blessing that Shiva was indeed satisfied that we were making habitat for the monkeys, and that this was permitted to call this a sacred task, and that we are worshipping Shiva by planting these trees and bringing the trees back to the mountain.